Good day to you, Willard Shepard, and we are here at the Miami Community News Network on In the Know, and we are honored today to have a distinguished professor who is with us from the University of Miami Law School, Professor Donald Jones, my friend for more than 2 decades.
Amen.
Constitutional law expert, and a person who has set off many people to go off to their legal careers here in South Florida and beyond. Great to have you with us today.
Great to be here.
The topic that we have is a gargantuan one that's impacting not only our community here, the state of Florida, many communities throughout the South and across the nation. And that is the Supreme Court's ruling basically dismantling the Voting Rights Act. And now here in the state of Florida, we're looking at redistricting.
Yes.
So let's take
two intertwined issues.
Yes. Let's take a trip down memory lane, first of all. How did we get here? And just how important is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and it being dismantled?
Well, first of all, let me say this. What we're witnessing is an historic setback in the struggle of blacks and people of color for political equality in the electoral process. To understand the issue before us, it is helpful to look at history and to try to understand how we got here. At the turn of the century, the 20th century, blacks face poll taxes, blacks face literacy tests, blacks face the white primary. And
counting jelly beans in jars, how many are there?
Right. And over a period of time, the court, particularly in the Warren Court era, struck down the poll tax, Harper versus Virginia. It struck down the literacy test. It struck down the white primary, Johnson versus Allwright. And so what we're getting, what we went through in this journey, this second Reconstruction, was a period in which the nation seemed to recognize, as Johnson said in his speech at Howard University in 1968, that you can't simply break the chains of slavery and tell the slave, now join the race. You have to make changes to allow that freed slave, the people who were just emerging from slavery and segregation, to take their rightful place. And so out of that narrative, that idea that we had to make serious changes, a number of civil rights bills were passed. The Voting Rights Act comes directly after the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, in which state troopers charged a group of demonstrators who were simply seeking the vote. They hit them with cattle prods. They knocked men into the river. And this was in March of 1965.
German shepherds released on civilians?
Yes, and a few months later, the Voting Rights Act passed. And the Voting Rights Act was a bold and courageous effort on behalf of blacks and the United States to change the system in such a way that the caste system that segregation represented would be dismantled. One aspect of that would be to give blacks equal political power, equal political participation. And the Voting Rights Act did that through 2 sections. One was Section 2, one was Section 5. And Section 5 was that if you were a state that had discriminated against blacks in the electoral process, then you had to send your electoral map to the Justice Department for pre-clearance. So it had this policing provision under Section 5. And Section 2 was a section that said we prohibit practices and changes to the voting process which deny blacks equal participation. And Section 2 requires that election process throughout the United States be equally open to blacks and whites. And the struggle has been since then to define what equal is. Now, for 60 years, from the time the Voting Rights was passed until recently, everyone seemed to agree on a certain concept of equality. And there are 2 very different schools of thought. And the school of thought that the court represented was whether the practice was intentional or whether it was simply one of effects. Mm-hmm. Both would be prohibited under the Voting Rights Act. Let me explain what we're talking about. for many years, for decades in Miami and decades in other states, blacks were up against headwinds in their effort to vote in the form of racial block voting. So in Miami, there was a district court case which said that when whites voted in Miami, or in Dade County in southern Florida, that whites tended to vote for whites, Hispanics tend to vote for Hispanics, and when they couldn't vote for a white or Hispanic, they voted against blacks. And there was a case that found that as a fact, and that was that there was a case called City of Mobile versus Bolden, in which also as a metaphor for what we're talking about, in which blacks hadn't been able to elect a person who looked like them for 60, 80 years. And so what the voting rights represents is a way to build a bridge from that segregated past to the future. And it says, if you have a practice, a voting map or a voting procedure, which discriminatorily impacts blacks, that on its face is prohibited under the VRA. Now, that was part of the framework for 40 years, 50 years. And recently, but that's a race-conscious framework.
And to that point, and
Yes.
we want to fast forward to that
Yes.
point, and I'll use myself as an example.
Yes.
I was honored. I have a bar license to practice before the United States Supreme Court.
Good.
I stood in front of the justices, raised my right hand to be able to argue a case in front of them, and that was 2 years ago. So if Willard Shepard is able to do that before the
Yes.
highest court in the land, why is it then that we haven't come far enough to say we no longer need this, which is basically what the court is saying,
Yes.
is that we've come enough distance.
Right.
And what's wrong with that?
That's the narrative of I'll call race fatigue or integration fatigue, and it's a narrative that we've done this long enough. It's called what I call it is a narrative of imposition. At one point, the narrative was blacks have been victimized by segregation and slavery. We need to help them. Now the narrative is, well, we've helped them enough, and now they are becoming a burden. They're imposing on our society. They're no longer deserving, and a parallel narrative that if blacks ask for, let's say we've gone too far, and the further we go, the more we take away whites from whites, the more we take away rights from other people. So there's this narrative that as blacks progress further, they are taking away rights from others. It's time to stop. It's time for us to have a colorblind society.
The roots of the case in Louisiana that
Yes.
led to this.
Yes. So there was a case, Robinson case. The Robinson case was a case in which Louisiana had done a new census, and the blacks were able to show that they could have had not just one but two districts, and that they showed that they had lived in districts which were sufficiently numerous and contiguous. They showed that there was racial block voting, and they also showed that Louisiana could have drawn a second district. And the Fifth Circuit said blacks are likely to prevail under the existing standards of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, because they've shown that this racial black voting exists, that they're facing discrimination in the form of this racial black voting, and you need to remedy that. And to remedy that, they created this district, and we call them we sometimes call majority minority districts, and that's a district that has sufficient concentration of blacks that it gives them a way to overcome the racial block voting. So they had two districts. And this is based on a notion that, yes, we have to be race conscious in order to remedy the ills of the past.
But the court has now stepped in and said, very short time ago,
yes,
race cannot be a factor in this.
Right. And that's a shift.
Political voting in a party, but race cannot be a portion of this, and that's
colorblind ideology.
Wildfire across the South, Louisiana, Florida. We're here. I was just with two Urban League directors from Tennessee who've seen basically what amounts to be Jacksonville, Memphis, the largest city in the state with the most concentrated minority population, split up into 3 different districts, and one of them running 300 miles across the southern border of the state.
That's incredible. That is in my view, a form of gerrymandering. It's called vote dilution, and we used to call it cracking versus packing. Cracking means you're breaking up blacks into these smaller segments. They don't have political power, or you're submerging them in one concentrated district so they don't have power anywhere else. And so we're seeing the reemergence of those patterns. And the Voting Rights Act was there to stop it. And what's happened is the Voting Rights Act has largely been nullified because it used the tool of race consciousness to create remedies. And now they've said that race has become presumptively an impermissible criteria. And the only way you can use race, you have to be able to show that there was intentional discrimination that took place. And so the standard to get a remedy under the Voting Rights Act now show intent. Another thing that's interesting is under the recent case is that at one point you could show racial bloc voting by saying, well, look, blacks have not been able to elect a representative of their choice over and over again. A result. Now what they're saying is, well, if we can explain that result by saying that the state has chosen to elect Republicans, to create Republican districts, then that's okay. So the state can be biased toward Republicans and against Democrats. And so you have to be able to prove that the state was not simply trying to create Republican districts. And that's typically what happens, that the districts become Republican, and those Republican people tend to vote. Racial polarization runs along party lines. And so to a large extent, blacks vote as Democrats. And so the more Republican districts you create, the more you, in effect, dilute black votes. And the court said that's fine. We won't call that discrimination. And so what the court is doing is they're creating a reinterpretation of the Voting Rights Act that sets 37 years of precedent on its head. They're reinterpreting jingles, and they're rejecting precedent that has allowed blacks to elect representatives ranging from Frederica Wilson, Darcy Hastings, to Hakeem Jeffries, and many, many more. Because if blacks have even 40% of a district, that gives them access. But if you break blacks up into districts where maybe they're 10% or 20% of the population, they are typically overruled by a majority white district, which votes as a racial bloc against their candidates.
So what do you think we're going to see just in terms of volume of the number of elected representatives in Congress?
Well, I think that we're facing the potential of a significant decrease. It's only a potential. So yes, what we're looking at is the dismantling of majority black districts across the country, in Florida and elsewhere. That will create a challenge. But here's the thing. I think that blacks have been innovators. We have, I think, produced people who are geniuses, who, in terms of the things they've been able to accomplish, the ideas they come up with. We have the ability, I believe, to overcome the vicissitudes of having to go to communities which may have not been receptive to us. And I think that we are in a time where we've never have more examples of success. We've had a black president, we have black CEOs, we have blacks who are taking leadership in sports and other areas. So I think that we should not be daunted by this, and we should not be afraid to cross over racial boundaries, ethnic boundaries, cultural boundaries, to take a message that can reach beyond the borders of the black community.
Congressman Fields, who represents this area in northern Louisiana, where I supply,
Yes.
where Buckstill Air Force Base is located, in the Shreveport area.
Yes.
He said the other day that, there's a lot of things that he's overcome in his
Yes.
political career as a congressman and 2 decades, and he's faced a lot of challenges.
Yes.
And he was always figuring out a way to jump higher, run faster,
Yes.
do it smarter.
Yeah.
But he said, one thing I cannot do is change my genetics.
No.
And therefore, I have no hope in this particular gerrymandered district.
I have hope. My hope is that if we have better ideas, if we can come with the conceptual or policy equivalent of a better mousetrap, better policies, more ideas, new ideas, and we can build coalitions. You see, there are two bridges to the future. One bridge was through political empowerment, but the civil rights era became what it is because we were able to cross hands and lock arms with people from other ethnicities, other ethnic groups, other races, and under the banner of a set of ideas which transcended race. And so we have to find a way to create, maybe we'll create coalitions on the basis of good education. Maybe we'll create coalitions based on we want safety for our kids. But we have to find a way to form coalitions, broad-based coalitions, maybe coalitions based on unity in labor groups. But we have to find a broad set of broad-based coalitions which allow us to continue the work. What is it? The work goes on, the cause endures, the dream shall never die.
And until to that point, if you take a district, and let's just say it was one here in Miami, tantamount to what they're doing in Tennessee, and it ran all the way up past Ocala, Lake Okeechobee, all along in there. And you would say, okay, what would those people have in common with each other in many regards? Healthcare, the access in rural communities, not having the same educational or health opportunities, just like a person that we would say that would live in the inner city in some of our neighborhoods here in Miami.
Right. I think, for example, let's say someone's a veteran. You may be, see, we're all Americans. And I think what we've got to do is believe deeply that what we have in common is greater than what separates us. Race is a fact, but it's also a fact that I'm patriotic. Maybe I have an idea of how we're going to create affordable housing. We have to be able to be sophisticated merchants of ideas. We have to be able to sell ideas, to sell policies, to sell a vision of America that is broad enough to reach people in communities different from our own.
Were you surprised with what the court did and the ultimate ramifications that could be from this?
Well, I wasn't surprised. Because this is part of the colorblind ideology. Is something that it's like a new baby for the Supreme Court. For the last 30 years, we've seen this colorblind, but it's not just colorblindness, which is at the core of the problem. What we're witnessing, Willard, is, I believe, the end of what I would call a second Reconstruction. One way to understand what's happening in society is to take an historical view. We had a Reconstruction that went from 1868 to 1877. And that Reconstruction ended because of a battle over a presidential election called the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. What we witnessed between 1954 and I would say an electoral system just now is a kind of second Reconstruction in which society, motivated by this narrative that we have too long had segregation, we too long had slavery, we've got to make amends. We witnessed that narrative play itself out and run into another narrative, and that's the narrative that blacks achieve at the expense of whites. That narrative, which has been propagated by demagogic politicians, by people in social media, has begun to erode away the unity that we once had as a country toward, and the people say also, well, look at how far blacks have come. Look at how many black CEOs that were victims of our success. Look how many black CEOs there. Look at people like Willard Scott who are doing so well. And so if you have these Willard Scotts and you have the Kamala Harrises and you have the Obamas, why do they need help from race consciousness? And that's like saying, let's say you had a guard dog at your house and you never had any burglaries in your house year after year. So now let's get rid of the guard dog. You haven't had any burglaries. You don't need but you see, the success that we've had in part comes from the fact that we did have a way to police racial black voting. And the benefits of a diverse society, many people like the fact that they're blacks who are lawyers and they have many different options in terms of who to vote for. And people enjoy the diversity. Now what we're doing is we're taking away the mechanism that created that diversity, which we all enjoy. And so it's a tragedy that this is happening, but I don't think that it's necessarily the end. It's not the end of our progress. And I think we simply have to develop a new set of strategies which allow us to overcome the barriers we're facing. We need broad-based coalitions, and we need to begin to explore what we have in common, which I believe is greater than what separates us.
But during this time period of this transition,
yes,
what are the ramifications of that in terms of representation?
Well, immediately there is a not merely a danger, but a likelihood that you see far fewer blacks in Congress, far fewer blacks as state representatives. That's the danger that we're facing, and the likelihood that you'll see more. Also, what you'll see, because of racial polarization, with most blacks in this country vote Democrat. You'll see fewer black representatives from Democratic states. Now, Republicans who are black may actually increase in Congress, but blacks in the Democratic Party who are in Congress and state representatives will probably decrease in a short term. But bad as though it seems, I do think it will be mediated by the fact that we've never been in a situation where we've had so many blacks who are qualified for leadership, who have law degrees, who have professional degrees, who have tremendous achievements. And so I think that the pool of blacks who are capable of standing for leadership positions is far greater than it was.
Where is it, if any, where you can look at a map
Yes.
and say, that's not lawful?
Okay.
That map and its circuitous route exceeds any constitutional limit. Is there a place where that exists?
Well, we see that was what we were doing for a long time. We were creating districts. Like, for example, in North Carolina, there was a district that ran along I-95 or I-85. And so the district looked like a serpent or something. And it did that because it was trying to capture blacks who had the ability to vote. I think what you'll see are districts which look different. The districts like that will be targets. So you're gonna what we're probably in for is a new round of districting wars, in which districts that blacks have had are going to be targeted based on the way they look, and if they look like a whip or look like an eagle's claw, then those are going to be, and there's a case which says, well, that's an aspect of almost like a prima facie case. Mm-hmm. And so gerrymanders, have a bad name, but the point is that in order for blacks to have equal political power, we have to make certain accommodations. We have to consider race in order to get past race. And I think that the other thing is this. It's up to the states to draw the districting maps. So if in a particular state, blacks can create a coalition of people to draw the map in a way that gives them political power, then we can continue. So the battle isn't over. The battle simply shifts to people in the particular states to try to find a way, a consensus toward progress and continued progress on issues of race.
Hard to do, though, in many states. I'll just use Tennessee as an example. There's a supermajority Republican there. Here in the state of Florida, obviously, you have House, Senate, and Republican governor. So for those people who feel an injustice with all of this, how can they ever reach a point where they think they have a level playing field? Because right after the Supreme Court came out, everybody in some of these states, Republicans, said, hey, we're going to redo these maps. They were even voting in Alabama, and they stopped the voting so that they halted an election that's underway. Okay.
Well, this
To
is
be able to go and say, hey, we need to follow the Supreme Court and redo these maps.
this is almost like a cliffhanger in the movies where the train is coming and you're tied to the railroad track. So how will we do that? But I think we have to find ways of suggesting to people that it's not a question of whether you're a Democrat or Republican. It's a question of who's the most qualified. And we've got to we've got to work hard also, I believe, to raise money. We've got to work hard to register people to vote. We've got to raise hard to educate people about the need for policies which are different from those that the other side is offering. And so this isn't a loss. The game isn't over. It's just that we're behind a couple touchdowns, and we've got to try to make up some yards.
I think across the board, and we live here in South Florida, which is such a diverse community, which is one of our greatest strengths, that people of all backgrounds, they just want a fair vote and know that their vote actually counts, and that 99% of the time a person's genetics doesn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't. Historically, it has. And we have to suggest to people, though, when we run for office, that don't look at whether I'm black or white. Look at what I can do. Look at what I've accomplished. Look at my vision that I believe will allow you to send your children to college, that will allow you to have an affordable home. And so we have to be able to come up with ideas which show how people have more of an interest in voting for the most qualified than voting on the basis of race.
That becomes, I think, very difficult. Some of the things we've talked about, and I was joking with you beforehand that people were trying to get me to run for Congress in a district here.
I'll write you your first check.
And I've said, hey, look, that's not where I live. And the law in the state of Florida is as long as you're a state resident, you can run wherever. And I said, no, I want to actually represent the people that are my neighbors if I ever chose to do that. How do we make sure that at the end of the day, if it's at all possible, that a person that lives in Miami-Dade County, and if they draw some crazy district, that the strawberry fields that are, up in the central corridor, that they can adequately represent that person? How would that be fair to both residents? Right.
And it's a real problem in that, political power has been wielded in this country through racial voting blocks. We have to figure out a way to, at the grassroots level, develop ties, develop community organizations, develop broad-based campaigns, whether it's for the education, whether it's against crime, but using grassroots strategies instead of the voting rights was top down. We have to look at power as something that grows from the bottom up, and working in local communities, and all politics are ultimately local anyway. Working in local communities, we have to develop our coalitions and develop campaigns which emphasize interests over identity.
It's always great to be with you. This topic, when this happened, obviously it's going to have a tremendous impact here in the state of Florida, here in Miami-Dade County, and across the country. We'll have to see how this unfolds. At the end of the day, what the actual representation is when you take a look at the volume of people of any background in any specific state, and what their congressional or state legislature and its genetic makeup is. And we're going to find that out here pretty shortly in 2026. And always great to be with you, a true scholar. I can say that I didn't get a chance to take one of your classes.
I regret
during
that.
Well, I can always say that the reason I didn't get a chance to take one of your classes is I went to FIU College of Law, and we had the highest bar passage rate and still have the highest bar passage rate in the state of Florida. So therefore, that's why I didn't get a chance to take a University of Miami constitutional law with the professor. Okay, God bless you and your family. Lord bless you. Thank you very much. And always thank you for being with us here on the Miami Community News Network.